There is one account I still think about, a major financial institution. You'd know the name, thousands of servers, a full system center deployment in progress. It was the kind of contract that would have changed our revenue number for the year. Not moved it, but radically changed it. We've been trying to get in front of the VP of Infrastructure, VP of IT, for 8 months. 8 months of emails, LinkedIn messages, calls to his assistant, introductions that never materialized, nothing. Not even a rejection, just silence, complete and utter silence. And then one of their project managers, not IT leadership, not a decision maker, a PM who managed the rollout schedule, called us. Not about consulting, they needed System Center training for their technical team ahead of a go-live date. And Microsoft had pointed them to us. 4 weeks later, we were inside that organization running a 4-day boot camp training session engagement, sitting across from their senior engineers. And by the end of day 2, I knew exactly where the consulting opportunities were because their own people were telling me. The VP of IT still didn't have a clue who we were. Didn't know my name, didn't know the company name, but it didn't matter. We were already inside. That's what I want to talk about today. Not how to get a meeting with the right person, how to stop needing one. Let me tell you what the front door looks like first, because that's where most IT services business spend most of their time trying to get in. The front door is typically the VP of IT, the VP of Infrastructure, the person who ultimately signs the vendor contract and controls the budget. You cold call them, you email them, you reach out on LinkedIn, and you hope a connection in common buys you a reply. If you have a good network, you try for a warm introduction. If you're lucky, you get a 30-minute call, 3 follow-ups before it goes quiet. Most of the time, it ends up going quiet. We were running a growing Microsoft-focused consultancy in the mid-2000s. We had real depth. System Center was our core experience or expertise, and we were genuinely among the best at it globally. But that expertise didn't matter if we couldn't get into the room. And getting in the room meant running the gauntlet, approved vendor lists we weren't on, procurement processes we weren't invited into, gatekeepers whose job was to keep firms like ours out. I remember a specific stretch, probably 18 months or longer, where we were good enough to win any single deal we were in front of, but we couldn't get in front of the deals. We were winning at the wrong point in the funnel. Everything we were doing assumed we could get a meeting first. And meetings with IT leadership at large enterprises don't come easy when you're not already a name they know and do business with. What I didn't realize then, what took me longer than it should have to see, was that I was thinking about enterprise sales as a 2-player game. Us and the VP of IT. Win that relationship, win the account. Lose access to that relationship, and the account's closed. But that's not how large organizations actually work. And the moment I understood that, everything started to change. Here's where I made my mistake, or more precisely, where I was leaving an enormous amount of opportunity on the table. Enterprise organizations aren't single decision makers or based on single decision makers surrounded by gatekeepers. They're networks of people who influence vendor decisions, people who own specific applications, people who manage specific infrastructure domains, people who approve training budgets, people who sit on internal steering committees. The VP of IT is one node in that network, not the easiest one often to reach out to first, and rarely the one that single-handedly matters. I'd been treating every large account as if the only way in was through the top. And because of that, When that door was hard to open, I assumed the account was hard to enter. What I should have been asking and wasn't was which function inside this organization has a problem that I can solve today without going through the VP of IT at all. And the answer to that question turned out to be everywhere. And I'd been walking past it for years. The first time we figured this out deliberately, not by accident, but as a strategy, was with training. We'd built our own system center curriculum, our materials, our lab environments, our course structure, the IP or intellectual property, we owned it outright. And we'd positioned it with Microsoft's field sales team as the only available training for these specific technologies in the market, which it was at the time. We were the sole provider. Here's what training does that consulting doesn't. Consulting enters an organization at a higher level, usually the VP of IT, through procurement, through a formal vendor selection process that often takes months and requires you to already be a known quantity with that business. Training, however, can enter through whoever owns the training budget, often a project manager who knows their rollout timeline includes a training phase or an L&D function, or a department head who's been told their people need to be up to speed. None of those are the VP of IT. So when a large enterprise bought System Center as a piece of software and a platform from Microsoft, and the Microsoft sales rep pointed them to us as the only training provider, we were getting inside that organization through a channel that IT leadership wasn't managing. We were in a 4-day room with their senior technical people. We were demonstrating our depth in real time, not in a sales pitch, but in a lab environment where there was nowhere to hide if we didn't know what we were actually talking about, but we did. We knew exactly what we were talking about, and we established credibility on day one. By day two of most engagements, the conversations were happening organically. An engineer would mention a deployment challenge, a team lead would ask how we handled a specific configuration, if we approved of the architecture, where we'd make changes, how we'd provide a solution to a problem, and I'd be taking mental notes, not in a manipulative kind of way, but because these were real problems and we can actually help the customer to solve them. By the time we identified a formal consulting opportunity, and there were always consulting opportunities inside these massive accounts, we'd trained their team. We weren't an unknown. We weren't the firm knocking on the door. We were the people who just trained their team, and we had advocates on the inside. And asking for an internal introduction to the right decision maker wasn't a cold ask anymore. It was a reasonable next step. The side door became our entry point. We just took a different path to get to the final destination. The second approach was more deliberate still, and it came out of a specific gap we spotted in the System Center ecosystem when we were deploying Microsoft Operations Manager. Microsoft Operations Manager was the monitoring platform of the System Center suite. And as it was deployed across large enterprises at scale and grew in market share, organizations began bringing in consulting firms, sometimes us, sometimes others, to architect and stand it up, implement it. Monitoring agents got deployed. They're going out, in this case, to thousands of servers across the entire environment. The platform was going live, but some core applications, like faxing applications, RightFax from OpenText being one of them, didn't have a way to monitor it. One of the most widely deployed enterprise fax platforms from OpenText, known as RightFax, had no native monitoring solution, and Microsoft's product group had no plans to create one on their own because it wasn't a Microsoft technology. It wasn't on their roadmap. How did we know that? Well, as an MVP, we went out to Redmond on an annual basis and we had monthly calls with the product team. We knew what the roadmap looked like, so we had some inside knowledge. Because there was no management pack for it, the teams that owned and operated the RightFax infrastructure which typically sat inside networking or telecommunications rather than directly under IT leadership, had a real visibility gap into their application, and nobody was filling it. So we decided to make an investment and build the RightFax management pack, not because we needed to, but because we saw an opportunity. And we had a client that wanted to fund it for us, but would allow us to maintain the intellectual property. Win, win, win for everybody. So what we were able to do was use the customer's funding to pay for our consulting services, build the management pack, and close a genuine gap, and then resell it throughout the industry. And by solving that real world problem inside a real function in that organization, that was something that created real value. So watch how the side door works here. In building the management pack, the RightFax team often reached out to us in these large organizations running RightFax. Not IT leadership, not the VP of IT, but the group that actually owned and operated the faxing infrastructure day to day. They hear about our management pack, maybe through the Microsoft ecosystem, maybe at a Microsoft conference, maybe online, maybe from our website, maybe through our social media outreach, and they reach out for a demo. The demo tells us two things immediately. First, they're running RightFax at enterprise scale, and they need to monitor it. Second, they have Operations Manager deployed, which means they're inside the Microsoft System Center ecosystem that we know better than almost anyone else. So now I'm in a genuine conversation with a function inside a large organization that I would never have reached through a cold call. And at the right moment, not in the first 5 minutes, but once we've actually delivered something useful, I ask a simple question. Who owns the Microsoft Operations Manager deployment? Who's responsible for the broader System Center environment? And those questions open the organization up. The RightFax team becomes my internal navigator. They're not threatened by the conversation. They're not the VP of IT. They're not worried about me selling into their budget. They're the people who had a monitoring gap and found a solution that they're happy with. They're now advocates, and advocates make introductions. Suddenly, we have a map of the entire organization that we need. Warm introductions to the people who matter, and a reason to be there that didn't require cold calling anyone's assistant. Both of these approaches share the same underlying logic, and I want to isolate it because I think it's the most transferable thing I can give you from this story. We entered each organization through a function that was adjacent to the decision maker, not through the decision maker directly. Training went through project management or L&D. The management pack went through the RightFax team in networking or telecom. Neither of those was the VP of IT. And in both cases, we were delivering something genuinely useful, that adjacent function, not positioning ourselves, not pitching, not asking for 30 minutes on their calendar. We were solving a real world problem for real people. That created goodwill, and goodwill created introductions, and introductions got us into rooms we couldn't have reached from the outside. That's the side door strategy. Now, the side door strategy doesn't work if you don't have something real to deliver. The training only opened doors because the training was genuinely good and unique. 4 days in a lab with no room to fake it. The management pack only opened doors because it solved a real monitoring gap that nobody else filled. The substance has to come first, but we had that technical substance. But if you have that substance, and if you have real experience, a real capability, a real product that solves a real problem, the question isn't whether you can get in front of the right people. The question is which function inside the organization you're starting with. I want to be honest with you about something here. This approach takes longer to set up than a cold call campaign. Building curriculum took us time, probably 60 days to build a course. Building a management pack takes time, maybe about the same amount of time. You're making an investment before you see any return on it. And there's no guarantee the specific account you're targeting will respond. But here's what I know after running this strategy for years across organizations that you'd recognize: large financial institutions, major retailers, global enterprises across North America and beyond. The accounts we entered through the front door, when we managed to get there at all, were accounts where we were always one relationship away from losing the contract. The VP of IT, if they moved on, the new person had a preferred vendor, and we were likely out. That happened more than once. The accounts we entered through the side door were different. By the time we had formal consulting engagements, we had relationships at multiple levels of the organization. We weren't one relationship away from losing it all. We were somewhat embedded. Enterprise sales is certainly not one conversation with one decision maker. It's a network of conversations. When you start treating it that way, when you stop asking, how do I get a meeting with the VP of IT, and start asking, which function in this organization has a problem I can solve today, and who does that function, who owns that function, and who can I talk to, that will move you further ahead than any cold call, email, or campaign. We didn't get into most of our best accounts through the front door. We found the side door delivered something real and let the work create the next conversation. If you're running an IT services business and you're struggling to break into accounts that feel out of reach, I want you to sit with one question. Have you actually tried the side door? Or have you just been knocking on the front door? If this landed for you, I'd appreciate a like on the video. It genuinely helps more people find the content. And if you want more of the real story of how we built this consulting business and Microsoft partnership practice into being part of the top 1% and then sold it for more than 8 figures, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more where this came from, and I'd love to share it with you. Good luck in growing your business. My name's Rory McCaw. Welcome to Self-Made Strategy.